AITA for refusing to save a man who destroyed my family? I, 29F, have been a trauma nurse for 7 years, and if you'd asked me a week ago, I would have sworn there's nothing left that could shake me. Not after all the blood, the screams, and the heartbreak I've seen. I work in a busy urban hospital where chaos isn't an occasional visitor, it's the baseline. The smell of antiseptic mixed with the faint metallic tang of blood is practically part of my uniform now. I can read vital signs faster than I can read text messages. I know exactly what kind of injury caused what kind of wound at a glance. I've performed CPR so many times that I can hum the rhythm to "Stayin' Alive" in my sleep. But this night carved itself into my bones. It was a Friday, which meant one thing in the ER, hell. Fridays bring in a special cocktail of humanity. By 9 p.m., the waiting room was standing room only, buzzing with restless energy, crying kids, exhausted parents, and the occasional drunk who thought it'd be fun to break his own fall with his face. Nurses like me thrive in that chaos. We move quickly, compartmentalizing emotions, triaging injuries, knowing which lives we can save and which ones will slip through our fingers no matter how hard we fight. It's a brutal skill, but it's survival. That night was textbook Friday night madness. I'd already treated a guy who tried to open a beer bottle with his teeth and lost, a car crash victim with a broken femur, and a college kid who accidentally swallowed a glow stick. Don't ask. My hair was slicked back, my scrubs already had blood stains from 2 different patients, and I was running purely on adrenaline and burnt coffee. That's when my coworker, let's call her Jenna, rushed over, her face pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. Jenna's a seasoned nurse too, not the type to spook easily, but she had this tense energy about her as she grabbed my arm. "Can you take the trauma bay?" she asked. I wiped my hands on a towel, barely looking at her. "Sure. What's coming in?" "Critical," she said. "Middle-aged male, GCS 6, hypotensive, massive blood loss. Possible internal bleeding. They're about 5 minutes out." For anyone not in medicine, that translates to, this guy is circling the drain. A GCS, Glasgow Coma Scale. Score of 6 is basically unresponsive. Add in blood loss and internal bleeding, and you've got yourself a full-blown code situation. I nodded. "I'll take it." Jenna hesitated. "You sure?" That made me look up. "Yeah. Why?" She gave this little shake of her head, like she couldn't quite put her finger on what was bothering her. "Just be ready. It's bad." That's the thing about trauma nurses. Bad doesn't faze us. I've seen people walk in with rebar through their chest. I've seen gunshot victims with more holes than a slice of Swiss cheese. I've even had to treat a guy who got mauled by his own pet tiger. Yes, you read that right. He survived. Barely. So when Jenna said bad, I just threw on a fresh pair of gloves, grabbed a trauma gown, and headed to the bay. The trauma bay is a stark, cold little room that feels like stepping onto a stage where life and death are constantly playing tug-of-war. Bright overhead lights illuminate every corner, every bloodstain, every frantic movement. It smells sterile, but if you've been there long enough, you catch the undertone of copper and iodine, of fear and sweat. I stood there for a second, just breathing, mentally running through the trauma protocol. Airway, breathing, circulation, disability, exposure. ABCD. Over and over again. That mantra has saved more lives than I can count. The sound of sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, until the paramedics burst through the double doors. And that's when my world tilted. They wheeled in a man on a stretcher, unconscious, his face pale and waxy, streaked with dried blood. His shirt was soaked crimson, clinging to his torso like a second skin. Even from a distance, I could tell he was fading fast. But that wasn't what made me freeze. It was his face. I knew that face. It felt like my blood turned to ice as recognition slammed into me. My breath caught in my throat, and for a second, I couldn't move. I couldn't think. My heart hammered in my chest as I stared at him, my gloved hands trembling. I'd seen him before. Not as a patient. Not here. Somewhere else. Somewhere I thought I'd buried deep. I couldn't process it right then, because trauma nurses don't get the luxury of shock. We move. We act. But that moment, that split second where my brain screamed, Oh my God, it's him. It burned itself into my memory. I snapped back into autopilot, rushing to his side, barking orders to the team. Let's get 2 large bore IVs. O-negative blood on standby. He's hypotensive. Get me a fast ultrasound, now. The paramedic rattled off his stats, but I barely heard him. My focus was split half on saving his life, half on the fact that I knew this man. And if I was right, he shouldn't even be alive. 6 years ago, my world shattered. I was 23, fresh out of nursing school, full of energy and ambition, believing I could save everyone. Back then, my older sister Emily was my anchor. She was the steady one, the one who reminded me to eat during my brutal night shifts, the one who'd show up at my apartment with a bottle of cheap wine and a box of takeout after a rough day. She had this laugh, loud and unrestrained, that could cut through any darkness. And then one night, she was gone. Emily was walking home from her job at a local bookstore. It was late, raining, and she was only a few blocks from her apartment. Witnesses said they heard tires screeching, saw headlights, and then chaos. The car never stopped. She was dead before the ambulance arrived. I remember sitting in the coroner's office, numb, listening to words I couldn't process. Massive internal injuries. Instant. Nothing we could have done. I'd seen countless patients die in my short career, but this was different. Emily wasn't supposed to be on a gurney with a tag on her toe. She was supposed to be texting me stupid memes and nagging me about my caffeine intake. The police called it a hit and run. Witnesses described the driver as a man in his 40s with a snake tattoo curling around his neck, the kind of detail that sticks in your brain like a shard of glass. A local artist sketched his face based on their descriptions. That sketch became a fixture in my life. I taped it to my fridge. I stared at it every night. I memorized every line, every shadow. I prayed someone would recognize him. No one ever did. The case went cold, and a piece of me froze with it. I carried that grief like an extra limb, heavy but familiar. I poured myself into my job, maybe because saving strangers was easier than admitting I couldn't save Emily. Over time, I learned to smile again, to laugh with coworkers, to feel somewhat normal. But the sketch was still there, tucked in a drawer. Always there. And now, that sketch had come to life. The trauma bay was chaos, alarms beeping, monitors flashing, the smell of blood thick in the air. The surgeon, Dr. Park, barked orders like a general commanding troops. Get a line in. Prep for intubation. Someone get a pressure bag on that blood staff. Everyone moved with military precision, muscle memory kicking in. But I couldn't move. Because the man bleeding out on that stretcher was him. Same face. Same tattoo coiled like a serpent around his neck, peeking through streaks of dried blood. His chest rose and fell in shallow, ragged breaths. He was pale, sweaty, half dead already. And suddenly, I wasn't a nurse anymore. I wasn't in scrubs under fluorescent lights with a team counting on me. I was a 23-year-old girl again, standing in the rain, screaming Emily's name, begging her to wake up while strangers held me back. My heart pounded so loud it drowned out everything else. The surgeon's voice broke through the haze. Nurse, transfusion now. I blinked. The team was looking at me, waiting for me to hang the blood. I grabbed the bag, my gloves trembling, but my mind was spiraling. I had his life in my hands. The man who killed my sister was dying right in front of me. And I could save him. Or I could let him die. I wish I could tell you that the decision was easy, that all my years in medicine and all my oaths to preserve life made the choice for me. But in that moment, my hands hovered over the supplies, frozen, and for the first time in my career, I hesitated. I thought about Emily, her bright smile, her ridiculous collection of thrift store mugs, the way she always smelled like lavender and old books. I thought about holding her cold hand in the morgue, whispering, "I'm so sorry," over and over because I wasn't there to protect her. And I thought about him, this man, this monster, how he didn't even stop, how he left her broken in the street and drove away, how he stole her future and tore a hole in mine. Pressure's dropping, someone shouted. I flinched, snapping back to the present. His vitals were tanking. He was seconds away from coding. My gloved hand tightened around the tubing. The room was spinning. I could end this. I could watch him bleed out and no one would ever know. The thought hit me like ice water. Because they wouldn't. No one would question a trauma patient dying. Not with wounds like his. Not with vitals like these. It would be tragic, yes, but expected. All I had to do was nothing. Just stand there. I looked at his face again, pale and slack, blood pooling beneath him, and for a split second, I almost convinced myself it would be justice. Not revenge. Justice. Emily's justice. But then I saw something else. Not his face, Emily's. Emily's laugh. Emily's kindness. Emily's fierce sense of right and wrong. I could almost hear her voice. You don't get to choose who lives or dies, sis. Not like this. My stomach twisted. My hands shook harder. Transfusion. Dr. Park's voice cut through my haze, sharp and commanding. Now, nurse. I swallowed hard, forcing my body to move. I spiked the bag, connected the tubing, and hung the blood. My fingers worked on autopilot, muscle memory taking over as I set up the pressure bag and started the transfusion. The team didn't notice my hesitation. They were too busy saving his life. And now, so was I. He stabilized barely. His blood pressure crept up, his heart rate slowed, and the monitors stopped screaming. He was still critical, still circling the drain, but for now, he wasn't dying. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt sick, because I just saved the man who killed my sister. I stepped out of the trauma bay as the surgical team prepped him for the OR. The hallway outside was dimmer, quieter, but I couldn't stop shaking. I leaned against the wall, trying to catch my breath, but the weight of what just happened crushed me. All these years, I thought I wanted closure. I thought I wanted justice. But standing there, covered in his blood, I realized I didn't even know what that meant anymore. And now he was alive. Alive and in my hospital. That's when I made a decision. I wasn't just going to save him. I was going to make sure he never got away again. No one in that trauma bay knew. Not the surgeon, not the respiratory therapist, not the paramedics who'd wheeled him in covered in blood. No one had any idea that the man bleeding out on the table wasn't just another nameless victim of some late-night chaos. He wasn't just male, mid-40s, unknown ID, GCS6, probable internal bleeding. He was Emily's killer. And I was Emily's sister. The room was a flurry of movement, organized chaos in its purest form. Monitors beeped in frantic warning, the kind of rapid, high-pitched alarms that signal someone is on the edge of dying. Gloved hands passed instruments, for bags, and syringes back and forth in a silent dance of precision. The trauma surgeon, Dr. Park, was calm but commanding, her voice cutting through the tension. I need that blood hung yesterday. Pressure's 60/40. We're losing him. Everyone was focused, eyes locked on their tasks. No one saw me standing there, frozen, blood pounding in my ears, staring at the man's face. The tattoo on his neck, a coiled serpent, mouth open, fangs bared, gleamed under the harsh fluorescent light. That same snake had haunted me for 6 years. It wasn't just ink. It was a symbol of evil burned into my memory, a brand that marked the man who destroyed my family. And now here he was, gasping out what could very well be his final breaths, while I had the power to decide whether he took another one. A part of me, the dark, vengeful part that I didn't even know I had, whispered softly, "This is justice." If I hesitated just a moment longer, if I moved a little too slow, if I let gravity and blood loss do their work, Emily's killer would die right here on this table. There'd be no trial, no jury, no plea deals. Just a silent kind of cosmic retribution. That whisper was intoxicating. But then came another voice, louder, sharper, ingrained into my very bones after 7 years in trauma nursing. You save lives. That's your oath. You don't choose who deserves to live. I could practically hear my old nursing professor's voice in my head. You're not God. You're a nurse. Remember that. My heart was a war drum in my chest as I hovered over the blood bag, trembling. My training screamed at me to act. My grief begged me not to. The monitors beeped louder. The patient's blood pressure dropped again. His heart rate was erratic, spiking and plummeting like a roller coaster. Hang that blood now, Dr. Park barked, snapping me out of my daze. We're seconds away from losing him. I looked down at him, at his pale face, slack jaw, blood pooling beneath his head. His breathing was shallow, mechanical, barely there. He was so close to death I could almost see the life leaving him. And for one terrifying second, I let myself imagine it. Imagine Emily's face, smiling somewhere, finally at peace. Imagine my family getting closure, even if they never knew the truth. Imagine the sketch coming down from my fridge for good, replaced by something lighter, something that didn't feel like a curse. All I had to do was nothing. One hesitation, one slip of the hand, one deliberate mistake. No one would question it. He was already bleeding out. Trauma patients like him don't always make it, even when we throw the whole world at them. I'd seen worse injuries take lives in less time. If I stood here, frozen just a little longer, he'd be gone, and nobody would suspect me. But then I thought about Emily again. Not just Emily, the victim. Emily, the person. Emily, who used to volunteer at the animal shelter every Saturday morning, even when she was exhausted. Emily, who always insisted on helping people, even when they didn't deserve it. Emily, who'd scold me for giving a rude customer that look when I was a teenager working at a cafe. Emily, who believed in justice, not revenge. She wouldn't want this. And suddenly I hated him even more. Not because he'd killed her, but because even now, even here, bleeding out on my table, he still had this power over me. He was forcing me to choose between being her sister and being a nurse, between vengeance and my oath. And that made me furious. I refused to let him take one more thing from me. I grabbed the blood bag and worked with the speed and precision I drilled into myself over years of trauma care. Spike, connect tubing, prime line, pressure bag, hang, blood going in. I called, my voice steady now, even though my hands still trembled under my gloves. The team moved around me like a well-oiled machine, no one noticing the war I'd just fought in my own head. Dr. Park focused on getting control of the bleeding. The respiratory therapist adjusted the ventilator. Another nurse pushed meds to stabilize his blood pressure. Bit by bit, we pulled him back from the brink. I wish I could say I felt relief. I didn't. I felt hollow, because I'd just saved him, and now I had to live with that choice. As the team wheeled him out of the trauma bay and toward the OR, I stepped back, pressing myself against the cool wall, trying to slow my racing heart. The hallway outside was quieter, dimmer, but it didn't feel any less suffocating. I ripped off my gloves and gown, tossing them in the biohazard bin, and stared at my shaking hands. His blood was still on them. Emily's killer's blood. I thought saving him would feel noble, like I'd done the right thing. Instead, it felt like I'd just made a deal with the devil. When I finally walked to the nurse's station, I forced my face into a neutral mask. No one could know. No one could suspect what was running through my head. But I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. He was alive, and he was in my hospital. And if the justice system had failed Emily 6 years ago, maybe I'd get another chance to make things right. When we finally stabilized him enough for surgery, it was like a collective exhale swept through the trauma bay. His blood pressure had crept back into the realm of survivable. His breathing had steadied, helped along by the ventilator. His skin still looked ghostly pale under the fluorescent lights, but he was alive. Alive enough to hand off to the surgical team, who rushed him down the hall to the OR. The moment the door swung shut behind him, the adrenaline that had been coursing through my veins all night began to crash. My knees felt weak, and for the first time in hours, I noticed how badly my hands were shaking. I slipped into the break room, a tiny square of linoleum with a flickering light bulb, a couple of chairs, and a perpetually empty coffee pot. The smell of burnt popcorn lingered, like it always did. Normally, this room was a haven, a place to breathe between traumas, to sip lukewarm coffee and scroll through mindless TikToks. Tonight, it felt like a confession booth. I sat in one of the plastic chairs, my scrub stiff with dried blood, and buried my face in my hands. I couldn't stop replaying the scene in my mind. Me, standing there frozen, debating whether to let him die. Me, seeing Emily's face in my mind's eye, hearing her laugh, and then feeling this tidal wave of rage and grief so strong I could hardly breathe. Me, almost crossing a line I'd sworn never to cross. 7 years of training, of ethics drilled into my head of first, do no harm, and yet, for those few seconds, I'd thought about it. Really thought about it. And the worst part? It had felt tempting. The guilt gnawed at me like a living thing. I'd done my job, I'd saved him, but my heart felt heavy with shame that I'd even hesitated. I was supposed to be better than that. Nurses don't choose. We save who we can, no matter who they are. Even monsters. I rubbed my face and took a shaky breath, trying to calm the storm inside me. My shift wasn't over, and I had other patients who needed me. I didn't have time to spiral. That's when the ER doors swung open and I saw her. A detective. She was tall, maybe mid-40s, with sharp eyes and an expression that said she'd seen it all. Her dark hair was pulled back in a low ponytail, and her plain blazer looked out of place among the chaos of scrubs and paramedic uniforms. I watched her scan the room before locking eyes with me. She approached quickly, moving with a kind of quiet authority that made my pulse quicken. "You're the trauma nurse on that incoming GSW and stab victim?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, my voice hoarse. She glanced around, then gestured for me to step aside. I followed her into a quieter corner of the hallway, away from the ringing phones and rolling gurneys. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "We got him." I blinked. "Got who?" She tilted her head slightly, her gaze steady. "The guy in surgery. We've been looking for him for weeks. He's the key witness in a case we've been building for years." I frowned, not following. "Key witness." She nodded. "He was going to testify tomorrow. Against a very dangerous man. The leader of the Stone Vipers. Ring any bells? The Stone Vipers. A gang name I'd heard whispered around the hospital plenty of times, usually when we got patients with suspicious injuries and no one willing to talk. And then something clicked in my brain. A name. A face. A case. Emily's case. My stomach dropped. The detective leaned closer. "That gang leader? He's responsible for multiple homicides, including one 6 years ago. Young woman, bookstore employee. Hit and run made to look like an accident." My breath caught in my throat. "Emily," I whispered. The detective's eyes softened. "She was your sister." I couldn't speak. I just nodded, numb. She sighed. "We've been trying to nail him for years. This witness is our only shot. He saw everything. He was willing to testify, even though it put a target on his back. Tonight wasn't random, he was ambushed. They wanted him dead before tomorrow." The room seemed to tilt around me. The man I thought was Emily's killer was actually her only chance at justice. If I had hesitated a moment longer, if I'd let him bleed out, Emily's killer would have walked free. Forever. I leaned back against the wall, my heart hammering so hard it hurt. My voice cracked, and I swallowed hard. I almost didn't save him. The detective studied me, her sharp eyes softening just slightly. "But you did." Tears burned my eyes, and I blinked them back. "I thought he was the one who..." She shook her head firmly. "He's not. And thanks to you, he's alive. Which means we might finally put the real killer away for good." The weight of her words crashed over me like a wave. I'd been so sure. So certain that fate had handed me Emily's killer on a silver platter. That all I had to do was nothing and justice would be served. But the truth was so much uglier, so much more complicated. I'd almost killed the only person brave enough to stand up to Emily's murderer. I felt sick. I sank into a nearby chair, pressing my palms to my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. The detective crouched in front of me. "Listen, I know this is a lot to take in, but you saved him. That's what matters. You did your job, and because of you, we have a real shot at getting justice for your sister." Justice. The word felt foreign in my mouth. I'd stopped believing in it years ago. And yet, maybe this was it. Maybe this was the moment I'd been waiting for all these years. Hours later, when the surgical team finally reported that he'd made it through, I felt a mix of exhaustion and something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. For 6 years, I'd been carrying Emily's ghost like a weight on my chest, convinced that the man who killed her would never pay. And now, because I'd done the one thing my oath demanded, even when my heart wanted something else entirely, there was a chance. A real chance. That night, as I finally sat alone in my car in the hospital parking lot, the sun just starting to rise over the horizon, I thought about Emily. I thought about how close I'd come to making a choice I could never undo. And I thought about the man in that hospital bed, hooked up to machines, who had chosen to risk everything to bring down a monster. For the first time in years, I felt like maybe Emily's story wasn't over. And neither was mine. I saved a man's life tonight. A man I thought murdered my sister. A man I almost condemned with my own inaction. I can still feel his blood on my hands. I can still see his face, pale and slack, the serpent tattoo gleaming under the trauma bay lights. And I can still hear that voice in my head, soft and dangerous, whispering, "This is justice. Let him die." I came so close. Closer than I want to admit. When the detective told me the truth, that he wasn't Emily's killer, but the key witness in bringing down the man who really was, I felt like someone had kicked me in the chest. I'd been seconds away from ending everything. Not just his life, but Emily's justice. The trial. The hope that the monster who destroyed her would finally face consequences. I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel proud. I felt sick. Because in that moment, standing there with the power to choose, I'd hesitated. I'd thought about letting him die. And no one knows. Not my coworkers, who probably just thought I froze up because of the chaos. Not the surgical team, who were too busy to notice me shaking. Not the detective, who only knows I was the nurse who saved him. To everyone else, I'm a hero tonight. The nurse who kept a key witness alive. But I don't feel like a hero. I feel like a monster. I've been a nurse for 7 years. I've seen life, death, and everything in between. I've seen families break down in hallways. I've seen people take their first breath and their last. I've always believed in the oath we take to save lives no matter what. And tonight, I almost broke it. I haven't told anyone about the connection. About Emily. About the thoughts I had while standing over him. I don't know what would happen if I did. Would I get fired? Arrested? Shunned? Or would people understand? Because for 6 years, I've carried the grief and rage of losing my sister to a faceless man who vanished into the night. For 6 years, I've been haunted by a sketch and a tattoo. And tonight, when I finally saw that tattoo in the flesh, all I could think was that fate had handed me the man who stole Emily from me. But it hadn't. And I almost made a choice I can't even admit out loud. I keep replaying that moment. The monitors screaming. The surgeon yelling for blood. My hands trembling. I could have stepped back, done nothing, and no one would have known. But I would have known. And now I do know that I'm capable of thinking something like that. So, Reddit. ATA for almost letting a man die because I thought he was my sister's killer?